Good morning. Okay, we're ready. Thank you all so much for being here bright and early, 8 a.m. I got in about 1 a.m. last night. Lots of thunderstorms up and down the East Coast, but happy to be here in Atlanta. So today we are going to talk about court responses to domestic violence, and specifically this session today is part of a larger curriculum that we are developing that's currently in a pilot phase, and that curriculum is intended to become kind of a national model for domestic violence fundamentals for court staff, and also for court leaders, court managers, court administrators like yourselves who want to think more deeply about how your court operates and what the different roles are and who's interacting with domestic violence litigants, and how those processes can be improved. So for today, we're going to talk briefly about that larger curriculum. There's also a save the date flyer for our national pilot, which is happening in Columbus, Ohio at the end of October. So you can see that flyer for registration details and for more information, as well as learning objectives for that training, which is going to be a 2.5 day, we're calling it an institute, and it is intended for court leaders, again, to think more deeply about how your court is responding to domestic violence cases. And then taking that back to your courts and thinking about how those various roles are interacting with domestic violence litigants. We're also piloting a statewide training meant more specifically for court staff, for frontline court staff. So the idea is that this national curriculum can then also be adapted at the local level for court staff. So realizing sort of the need that's out there in terms of the kind of lack of consistent or standardized domestic violence training for court staff. So this project came out of a partnership between the Center for Court Innovation, where I work, and the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, where Danielle works. Also with the National Center for State Courts, the Battered Women's Justice Project, and the Office of Violence Against Women. So we're really excited to be here today. This is kind of the first time that we're sort of trying this out, and we're looking forward to hearing feedback and hearing really all of your ideas and getting you to kind of think more deeply about this topic. So today we're going to identify core competencies in the context of domestic violence cases and litigants. So we're really going to actually draw from some of the NACM principles, which you'll be able to review today if you're not already familiar. And we're going to have a discussion about how court leaders can better execute those fundamental purposes and responsibilities of the court, those general responsibilities, those overall responsibilities, but specifically in the context of domestic violence. And we're going to analyze sort of the challenges posed by domestic violence in achieving those goals of the court. And this is going to be a very interactive session, so we're going to keep you on your toes here at 8 a.m. We've got an interactive session where we're really going to kind of explore the dynamics of domestic violence and how that can play out in the courtroom. And then we're also going to facilitate a discussion with all of you about how you all as court leaders can sort of change court processes and better respond to domestic violence cases in your courts. So this is just an overview of the overall pilot training, and I'm not going to spend a long time on this because you have a flyer in your materials and you can see all of those learning objectives there. And I'd like to get started and turn it over to these guys because we have a really short amount of time and we're going to try to pack it in. Okay.
Thank you, Kate. Wow, that was pretty quick, quick and fast. Good morning, I'm Danielle. I always laugh when everyone introduces myself and my title and my organization because by then the session's over, since I have a long name, a long title, and I'm from an organization with a long name. But I just wanted to get you started with, as we are here today, thank you, with a little bit of a warm-up exercise. So I'm going to ask you a question, and then if we can, I'll run the mics. And then Kate's going to use our impromptu flip chart here. Okay. So, what are the overall goals of the court system? Pretty general question. Justice. Resolve disputes. Safety. Fairly. Resolve disputes fairly. And safety was one.
To make a formal record of people's rights and obligations.
To do all of this in a timely manner.
Oh, to do all of it in a timely manner. No pressure. Any other goals that come to mind? To provide equal access to justice. Those are some pretty good goals. Just want to make sure I got everybody. Okay, thank you. So we're going to use some of those goals. We assume that many of the goals that you're going to provide for us was pretty much in line with some of the work that we've been doing around this curriculum. And we really want to draw upon the experiences that you as managers have had in terms of your NACM core competencies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Javoyne to talk about those competencies a little bit more.
Good morning. Can you hear me? How are you this morning? So how many people went to the aquarium last night? Okay. How many people stayed till 11? So that would be me. So good morning. Thank you for getting up and being here with us for this very important topic. So as members of NACM, you know that NACM sets out the guidelines, and they have core competencies that we in the court system follow. And they recently, how many people here have visited the website and seen and are familiar with the core competencies? Okay. So they're on the website, they're on the NACM website, but they used to be a core of 10. And they've recently expanded those 10 to 13. But they include, oh, thank you. So this was the original 10. And then I'm leaving this up here because purpose and responsibilities of courts is still the center piece for all of the core competencies, but they've changed a couple of the names a little bit. So I'm going to give you the new names, and it's 13 now instead of 10. Some of the names are the same, but they tweaked it a little bit. So public trust and confidence, purposes and responsibilities is still there, case flow and workflow, operations management, public relations, educational development, workforce management, ethics, budget and physical management, accountability and court performance, leadership, strategic planning, and court governance. So these are all the core competencies that NACM has outlined for us to give us guidance on how we can look at our court system, how we look at how we fit in that court system, and things that we should be thinking about when we're interacting, developing programs, teaching our staffs on how to engage with the public and with our people that we support, depending on what your role is in the court system, and those who support you. So today's focus is primarily on two of these core competencies that we're going to incorporate in our conversation as it relates to domestic violence. And that is purposes and responsibilities of the courts, and later on we'll talk about leadership. So those are the two things that we will concentrate on. So when we talk about purposes and responsibilities, and I'm going to walk over here and switch papers. Oh. And one thing I failed to mention that NACOM also has for our guidance in the area of domestic violence is last year in 2017, they put out a guide to domestic violence cases. And this goes more in depth and is really in line with what we're talking about this morning. So it was very good to see the partnership and the thought process. You could tell that people that work with domestic violence helped put this together, because it was very in-depth as to how to interact the court system with what it is we need to do for people that are going through domestic violence, and the different phases and stages of people that are going through domestic violence. So purposes, the competency on purposes and responsibilities is focused on ensuring access to the court process for all who seek it, managing the business of the court in a manner that promotes efficiency, transparency, and the opportunity for fair and timely dispositions of cases filed. So when we're talking later about specifically domestic violence cases, that's one of the areas that comes to mind, because time is of the essence for people going through domestic violence situations. And we, as people in the court system, need to be cognizant that just saying this is reset to next month can be damaging and sometimes deadly for people that are experiencing domestic violence. Exercising leadership among other justice-related agencies, working together in a partnership with other agencies to provide the best information and support for these people that are going through domestic violence or experiencing domestic violence. Also, the purposes of the court are to promote justice in individual cases, to ensure the public perception of justice in individual cases. So those two things you would think should be the same, but they're not. So you have to ensure justice, but you also have to promote that, because if you're doing it to the side and nobody understands it, they don't know what to expect, you haven't done a good job of getting that information out, that it really is a justice system for them, then they won't come and seek your help. Provide an impartial forum for the resolution of legal disputes. Protect individuals against the arbitrary use of governmental power. To provide a formal record, we heard that earlier, of legal status. Deter criminal behavior. Rehabilitate individuals convicted of a crime. Provide for the separation of convicted individuals from society where necessary. And to protect vulnerable populations. This is where domestic violence victims come in as well. And promote coordination with justice, public health, and social service and other agencies. So this core competency is one that we will definitely focus on today, because it wraps its arms around, if you will, the issues that are involved when we have domestic violence situations and domestic violence victims. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over.
So I wanted to just get a show of hands in terms of who has been to a domestic violence training, specifically on the fundamentals around domestic violence. Okay. Okay, so did you want to come up and co-present with me right now? No? Okay. I'm going to do a small exercise. It's going to be a small group exercise just for a few minutes to help you analyze the context of violent behavior and the meaning and intent behind that behavior. So we're just going to give you some slips of paper. It's going to have a specific behavior and a question under that behavior. And I want you to work in a group. There's going to be two behaviors. And I just want you to work as a small group, just create a little small group to answer the question. And then have assign a person to report back. And then after a few minutes of discussion, we're just going to have a large group debrief, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and if you can give, okay. You guys can take this group and then give that one in the back. That's good. Yeah, no, just give two to the middle group. And you can give that to to the group all the way in the back to the left. Okay, so this group is here. So I just make sure you give them to the middle group. And then that's it.
That's it?
Okay, here you go. So you two are working together? Okay. So they're just working. Yeah, here, I'm just gonna give them just random ones. I didn't forget about you guys. Oh, you have one. Oh, you have one. Give you two. You guys have two, or do you have one?
Oh, I have one. I gave one to that other group.
You have two. You have to work on two behaviors.
Okay, so then-
I gave them another one. I got it. Thank you. So I get a sense that people are done with their behaviors and discussing them. Do you want to run mics? Okay. So are you all, you have a, sure. Okay. So everyone has designated a person to report back for your group? Some, or just do it?
No, it's probably not for the whole group.
Oh.
Question. So it says checks money in partner's wallet. Why would a person who's being battered do this? You mean the batterer?
No, the person, the victim.
Oh. Okay.
Both of these are victims.
Oh, okay. Well, we did it wrong.
Oh, that's okay. But you could do it, you know. Okay. Yeah, but so why would somebody who is being, who's the victim do it?
Okay.
I just said being battered because we used battered. Why is the person battering do something?
Right. Okay.
So,
Okay.
okay, so a few people are just finishing up. So everyone, we had 6 different behaviors and a question under it. So I'm going to go to anyone who's ready to just read your behavior and tell us why somebody would do that behavior.
Is it turned on?
I don't think that's on.
Let's try this again.
Okay.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
The behavior that we have is pressures partner to have sex. Some of the reasons why a batterer would do this is it's all about power and control. It's to make the person feel small and less human, and to convince them they're not even in control of their own body, that they can do what they want at will.
And did somebody have pressure's partner to have sex on this side? You did? Okay.
We said that because the person's self-esteem is low, sometimes they're just complacent, and then sometimes women think that sex makes everything better. Like if it's a bad situation at that time, sometimes they think by having sex or giving in, it would just make it go away for the moment.
And what was your question?
Pressure's partner to have sex.
Your question.
I'm sorry. Why would a person who is battered do this?
Okay. So you have who's doing the battering, their reason, and why somebody who's being battered would do it. Did you have the same behavior? Oh, no,
We
you
had a different behavior. Ours was Reed's partner's email, and why would a person who's being battered do this? In our conversation, it was a number of things. However, we went with the opposite side, where reading emails would prepare him or her to get their safe space and prepare their safe space to flee. Also, they know when that batterer is out, what they're doing, if they're having an affair with another person, how in-depth it is, how severe it is, especially if they're being battered very severely. They know when that batterer is out with the other person and with friends, so they can prepare if that person comes back in heavily intoxicated, or if their mood is going to be kind of polite and happy. But it's mainly so that he or she can know what's going on, because in our conversation we talked about if you feel that you're prepared, which is you're not prepared, it's an illusion, because I used to be a battered woman. You're not prepared, but me going through his themes allowed me to prepare myself for my run to go to my safe place, and that's what happened.
Thank you. So who had Reed's partner's email on this side?
So ours was read partner's email, but why would a person who batters do this? And our discussion was so that the person could maintain control of the situation, look for information, see if their partner is giving out any information about them, and just find ways to continue to have control over that person and to further isolate them.
So were you seeing two different motives behind the same behavior? Okay, so can we have another behavior that hasn't been reported out yet? In the back.
Ours was tells a close friend that their partner is abusive, and then the question is, why would a person who is being battered do this? And our answer was to reach out for help, to help assist them get out of the situation.
Okay. And who had that same? Yeah, I should just give the mic to you.
So ours is tells a close friend, partner is abusive, and why would a person who batters do this? We actually had to read this several times to make sure we were reading it properly, because I think we assumed at first it was the other situation. But then once we realized, we thought, why would the batterer tell a close friend that their partner is abusive? And again, it was to sort of get their story out first, maybe spread lies about their partner so that they could, again, further isolate that person. If people believe that the victim is the batterer, then they would have more people on their side, I guess.
Well, and it's a struggle, right? So this one was a hard one, so I purposely gave that one to you because I knew you could do it. And oftentimes it can be that both are using violence, right? We've heard that a lot from judges and court staff and lawyers, and so, but one's abuse might not be the same. So he or she that is actually the more abusive person may talk to a friend about it, but is not really afraid of that person, right? But saying, oh, well, he or she is just as abusive, or did you know what she did to me? Just in conversation, that person may feel that that person is being abusive, but the impact may be different on that person. Any other behaviors?
We had Chuck's money in the partner's wallet, and our question was, why would a person who batters do this? And we did it to have a sense of control over the other person, and so it can create a codependence in that relationship, so that they always know, I'm always going to be looking at what you're doing, so they will never have any free will, and you'll always be questioned, why is money missing? Why do you have extra money? Where's the money going? And you always have to report to that person.
And on this side?
So we had a similar answer that basically the victim would be checking the wallet to see if the partner is like siphoning money from the bank account to keep the person from leaving, or the victim might want to check the wallet so they could take the money and leave to a shelter or just escape the situation.
Okay. Any other behaviors that someone wanted to talk about? So I wanted to go back to the other behavior, the first behavior, the pressures partner for sex. Was there any other reasons why a person who is being battered, the victim, would do that?
I just saw that in an Oscar-nominated movie, the one about the creature from the Lagoon, basically, that shows up. And
Shape
of Water. Do you remember the scene? The husband's really controlling and abusive and clearly violent, and the wife pressures him into sex, clearly to pacify him and calm him down. And stave off a problem. You can see that's why she's doing it. And you can see she's just submitting when she's got him underway. It was a great scene.
Right. Well, I'm going to use that. Thank you for that video clip. We always need video clips for our, I hope it's not too graphic. But any other reasons why?
Well, maybe the victim is still in love with the perpetrator and she thinks that can maybe save the relationship.
Any other thoughts? These are complicated behaviors when you try to parse them out. Why are people doing it? Why may they be doing it?
I think for a person who has no control, it's one way they can get some control back.
A sense of getting control. All real reasons on the way.
They might perceive sex to be a safe place. When there's a violent scenario, it might be the safe place.
Might be the safe place. So yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that. So we've heard from a lot of victim survivors that if they feel as they initiate sex, which is very complicated to talk about in the courtroom, they may be de-escalating the violence. Because if he, in this particular situation, if he gets instigates it or initiates it, it may be more violent, more rough, and if they are preemptive, that could be a less painful experience. We've also heard many times that is to distract away from the kids. So if there's kids in the house and somebody's getting violent, they feel like the violence is about to come on, that the use of sex will help distract from the kids. Right? So what I heard, did anyone want to talk about what they heard in terms of the differences between this side of the room and this side of the room around the behavior? Did anyone catch a theme? I know some of you caught the theme.
I think there's an illusion of control by both parties. The perpetrator wants to make sure that they're in control of the victim and the circumstances, and the victim is always trying to maintain some control. It's an illusion, but trying to have some control over their out-of-control life.
So trying to make sense of an out of control situation. The control is really an illusion, right? One is using a behavior to maintain dominance and control coercive behavior. One is trying to use this behavior to do a lot of survival skills, right? As you mentioned, trying to be a couple steps ahead, trying to figure out what to do. You're really, this side is really trying to, not manipulate, but really just juggle and anticipate where this may go. So the same behavior, different impacts, different intent. And I think that is really important when we think about how complex these cases can be, because they come in to your courthouse, your courtroom for some of you, and you constantly have to say, what does this on paper, or what is this person telling me means? And then if you see that behavior, how does that help you respond and build systems in your court that can control from this very complex course of behaviors, right? How do you maintain safety and efficiency and justice in a very unbalanced, skewed, complex, emotional situation, right? So I just wanted to give you a sample of one of the exercises that we've used to try to explain how context is really critical in these cases. Thank you, Kate. What Kate didn't mention before that I wanted to talk about is we have a context. We have the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges has been for almost 20 years providing judges with fundamental domestic violence cases, both in civil and criminal context, right? And it was the judges in many ways that said, this is great education. We do it two to three times a year. You probably sent many of your judges to our programs. This is great education. I want this for my courthouse. And so I want to be able, when I come back jacked up, that's what they say, jacked up, Danielle. No, they don't. So, but when I come back home to my community and I'm really excited about something, I want to have my court administrator, my court manager have that same ethos, that same understanding, that same value of how we should be handling these cases. So we said, wow, there's an opportunity for that. Let's use the same style, the same similar exercises, and create this training for court personnel. And then so you both have that kind of training, you come back and you have partners to do something different in your court if you so need to. Or you can just pat yourself on the back and say, we're doing everything right. Right? So, this is complicated, and I just already reiterated some of these things about when we hear about a domestic violence situation, it's usually an incident. We want to hear it, and I say we as court staff or judges, we want to hear it in a very linear fashion. We just want to hear what we need because we really know what we need to get moving on the case, right? But when people, I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about being trauma-informed, trauma-responsive. So how does that work when you know that somebody is in crisis and somebody is experiencing trauma? I can tell you that I like to tell stories, and I don't do them in a linear fashion. I'm like, well, back in the band camp, well, in that time, oh yeah, when I was in Copenhagen, no wait, and then people are like, what's the point of the story? I'm like, I don't know, So in general, you don't really tell stories in a linear fashion unless you're ready for it, right? So this can be very difficult how we work in life, in everyday life, and how the court system wants us to prepare information. So how does that, when you think about your overarching goals, how do you meet the two? You don't have to answer now, but I just want you to think about it. When you think about domestic violence, you really want to think about, and this is the last critical question, who is doing what to whom and with what impact? Just when you hear a story, when you hear something, who is doing what to whom and what is that impact? So I'm sure everyone's heard this example, but if somebody gives me roses, okay, I don't like roses, sunflowers. If somebody gives me sunflowers, and I'm like upset about it, and you're like, what's the big deal? He gave you sunflowers. Your husband gave you sunflowers. That's beautiful. He knows that those are your favorite flowers. You know, why may I be upset about that? It's an apology. Sorta. Or it could be a threat. So what you may not know is that every time he rapes me, he gives me sunflowers. Right? So who is doing what to whom and with what impact? And how would that come out? So those are the hard, complex questions that we have around these types of cases. And these types of cases are going through civil, criminal. We see them in probate. Our judges are now saying, oh, I rotated, and now I'm on the probate, and now I'm seeing this stuff on probate. Like, I see it everywhere, right? So we have to think about it in terms of, usually people think, oh, it's more of a family violence. It's a family court matter, right? But really, this impacts everything. Right now, it's impacting quadros, right? So, and we're trying to figure out how to get ahead of this because now people are retiring, there's all these pensions, and there's a lot of coercive controlling behavior trying to get quadros. So it's just amazing and troubling how pervasive this is and how much you see it in the court system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and talk about leadership because everyone is in a position where they can be asserting leadership, whether it be formal or informal, in your courtroom, your courthouse. In terms of how best to handle these cases that best meet the needs of your community, right? We want universal, promising practices that can be tailored to what your needs are in your community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Javoyne.
So when we talk about leadership and what we're doing in the courtrooms and our courthouses and the people that we come in contact with, what are some things? Well, first of all, let me ask the question. Is there anyone here who has a domestic violence court? So we have some here. We're not that fortunate in my area. So you're exercising leadership just by the fact that you have established a court in your jurisdiction to focus and tell the world this is important to your jurisdiction and we're going to take special care. But how can some of us who do not have a domestic violence court, what are some things that we can do to show and improve the processes and take that leadership role in how we handle and interact with people who are going through domestic violence situations? Any ideas? So one of the things that comes to my mind as I'm a new clerk in my area. I've been a clerk now for 6 months, but my background is in criminal prosecution. And I was a former chief assistant DA, solicitor, all that good stuff. And in going and prosecuting domestic violence cases, in addition to trying to get the whole story, I only focused on the criminal side of it. But now as the clerk, I have dispossessories, evictions. And how can a batterer use that process against their spouse when it's convenient, or threaten it when it's convenient? And these are areas, and as an example of an area to exercise leadership, make sure we get all the information and find out what's going on before you just stay tied to your piece of paper. with the information that you're receiving. We all process TPOs, and sometimes we have judges that haven't. We have a lot of part-time magistrates that hear TPOs in our jurisdiction. So we have to make sure as court leaders that everyone that has the necessary training that they need to have. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm in Richmond, Virginia, in Henrico, and I am the clerk of court for a juvenile court.
Okay.
So we have what we call a CRDV docket, which is a criminal domestic violence docket that we have these types of cases come in on. So in your question, you wanted to know what was being put in place. So we have victim witness in the court building within our court services unit. So when a victim comes over to file a protective order, once they do their paperwork, the court services unit pairs them with the victim witness advocate who talks to them about the process, and then comes over with them to the court side when they come for their preliminary protective order. Once they come over, we have a safe place, we call it. It's a room that they can go in with the advocate until their case is called. The deputy will go and get them. And also when they come back for their permanent protective order, when the batterer or whomever it may be is in the court building, they can go into that room to be secluded until that time. Also, when they come in for the criminal piece, the victim witness advocate is also paired with them at that time. What we have in Virginia, of course, we can't give legal advice and information, but the Supreme Court of Virginia was nice enough to put together this website called Self-Help. It's on our main website. And when you click into that, it tells you about all the services, what a protective order is, how to find an attorney, mediation, just all these things that go hand in hand, evictions, what you can do. And so when they come in on the protective order, the protective order covers them where the abuser, if it's a spouse, the protective order covers them where it says that the abuser cannot terminate the utilities down to the cell phone. The victim could get possession of the house, and then when it comes in on the permanent, the same things could apply where the judge will put those things into place. And of course, if they terminate them, they would be in violation of the protective order.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shonda. So I think I'm under a speaker. Those are some great ideas, and I wanted to ask other people in the room. So who else has a safe room designated for those who are coming in as victims of domestic violence? Show of hands. Okay. Who has worked with your judges or your other court staff to implement protocols on how to, or develop a protocol and implement it on how to handle cases where there's domestic violence in the courtroom, in terms of how to situate people and how to let people exit, and your bailiffs? Or has anyone, Ritz, do you want to talk a little bit about it, and what state are you from? Oh.
We have an organization called DART in our courthouse, and it's a domestic assault response team. And kind of like what she was saying, they partner up with the domestic violence victims. They go to court with them. Outside of all of our courtrooms, we have conference rooms that they can sit in, or they can sit in a victim witness room. The bailiffs will hold back any of the batterers. They have to stay in the courtroom. We even have them at times if it's a real serious situation. Our deputies will escort them right directly to their cars.
Great.
So depending on the situation.
And so is it an actual protocol, or is it just how do your staff know that that's the way things are supposed to be done?
It's a protocol, but at the same time, it's kind of based on situation. Not every situation needs a deputy to walk them to their car, but based on the level of violence, based on the threat, based on what's happened in the courtroom, the deputies will take it and raise up their security level to move on to what they need to do next as far as protecting the victim.
Great, thank you. So, can I jump?
I was just going to ask if you have a domestic violence court, right? Do you? You do. I was going to ask someone who has a domestic violence court, what are some things that you all do that you think is maybe different than or a regular court? For those of us that don't have one.
I think the biggest thing is the intake process, because they have a one-on-one session with the clerk of the court and they help do the intake process, and they really follow up with all the allegations, write everything out. And if things are said, if there's any abuse happening in the home, sometimes a call is made to the hotline for child abuse, and so things are, so it's an additional resources to the family. And if they need, assistance with getting into a domestic violence shelter, information is given right then and there. We also have partnered with the Lodge, which is one of our bigger domestic violence shelters. And so if you go into the Lodge in an emergency situation, even though we are closed, we have emergency protocols, so you can get an after-hours temporary injunction in Miami-Dade County.
Thank you.
Our favorite judges is from Miami-Dade. I think you know. Any other examples of what you've been doing in terms of creating safety, efficiency, formal records, fairness, in terms of how we handle these DV cases?
Okay, so I'm a judge, so this is very micro level because it's just my court, my staff. But my staff and I talk a lot about these cases. We debrief every time we do a domestic violence sentencing. I do bench probation when I order people into domestic violence perpetrator treatment, and they come back pretty regularly to my court, especially when they're being non-compliant. And we have domestic violence pop up infrequently. Well, I shouldn't say it pops up regularly, but unexpectedly in other cases, like civil cases. And when it does, my staff has learned who the people in the courthouse are that can link our victims with services. And we basically escort them to make sure that we don't break the link between us and the person who's got access to resources. So it's kind of micro training. It's me and my staff talking about this stuff and how to deal with it.
Great, thank you.
Have you had those conversations with your fellow judges?
Bernadette, sorry.
So the question was whether I've had those conversations with my fellow judges. Yes, in the sense that I've been a trainer for other judges. I've taught on domestic violence. No, in the sense of sitting down with another judge and saying, this is what I recommend you do. You have to avoid that with judges. You have to be more a resource for them too. Do you follow me?
Oh, I
know, but I do make suggestions when people ask me for advice.
Okay. Very nice response.
There's some in the back.
Oh, we have one more question, and then I'll run back here. Go ahead.
We have written grants in the last 5 years to provide services actually to the defendant and to keep track of them by monitoring their DV classes that they attend and make sure that they do it and report back to the judge instead of depending on the defense attorney or the PD to do that. And now we've switched gears and wrote grant for victim advocate that started July 1st. So now we're going about the safe room and getting stuff together, a program together on how to help the victim. And we have not reapplied for grants to help the defendant. So it's a total shift. Yeah, so it'll be interesting.
What is it, an Office on Violence Against Women grant or
yes.
OVOCA? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we have 2 DV courts because we have so many DVs that the volume is very huge.
Where
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, okay, LA. Thank you. I mean, not LA, Las Vegas, my state.
I wonder if you have established the linkages between, the possible linkages between domestic, between domestic violence cases, trafficking, drug abuse, and mental health.
Oh, yes.
Because I've seen all of that linking up, and do you have a program that's comprehensive enough to address it in that context?
So there are definitely, it's interrelated. Domestic violence and trafficking have a lot of similarities in terms of coercive controlling behavior and the ability and the difficulty of getting out. but the comprehensive nature of trying to deal with all four of those issues, I have to say that we don't have a forum other than when for me, Center for Court Innovation might be different. Our trainings that we develop are talking about domestic violence. We have a trafficking institute for judges. We have a teen dating violence institute that I oversee all of them. And we try to weave it all in, but not in the way that you're actually talking about it, I think. We try to make those linkages, but we find that too, a trafficking case can come in criminal, it can come in juvenile, and our judges, depending on, and also managers, I'm sure, but you probably have a little bit more latitude depending on what kind of court you have. They're going to be like, I'm in a juvenile docket. I have a juvenile, delinquency docket, or I have a child abuse and neglect. Some judges may hear both, or some may say, I only handle civil protection orders. So our goal is trying to say, okay, these are all interrelated, and how do you communicate with others in your courthouse or your community to get the services, to learn about the services, to get the services? How do you identify what's your role in terms of that? So it's a very complicated issue, and they're all interrelated, and especially substance abuse and mental health. I mean, on both sides, right? And so how best do you become trauma informed and help your community safety in trying to help both sides? So I think that's a really great question. Any other ideas of leadership or questions that you might want to, sorry.
In our court, we have a strict protocol from the time the incident takes place until it goes to court. In other words, from the time the incident takes place, a young lady, she comes in and she talks before the magistrate. At this time, the case is probable cause for the issuing of a warrant. In many cases, we have been instructed that sometimes a young lady will come in who has been abused under domestic violence protocol, and she doesn't want to talk to a male, because as she talks to that male, she sees another man who has abused someone, which is not the case. So we make sure that there is a female magistrate on duty at all times to actually handle these problems. Once the warrant is issued, the warrant is automatically sent out to a precinct in that area for immediate service. We do not delay. Once the person, he is arrested and brought in, his bond is set, his court date is set. Upon the day of trial, all individuals are notified by the docket that these trials are taking place in this courtroom, because we have a strict courtroom for that. Guards are notified, bailiffs are notified. Case is held. Once case is held, if he is to be arrested, he is automatically taken to the holding cell. If he is not to be arrested that day, we make sure that she gets out of the building first with a 10-minute head start so she can get to a safe haven. He is not allowed to leave until she gets out of there. We also have a special unit that once a warrant is issued and we know she has a case that's coming before the court, that person gets with her and walks her through the whole process. Not only the process, but helps her to understand what is taking place. Because we have found in many cases that once a person is abused, they don't really understand sometimes because other things are on their mind.
Right. Thank you. What community are you from?
This is Birmingham, Alabama.
Birmingham, Alabama. Great. Thank you. So our time is almost up.
One more observation.
Oh, sure.
Domestic violence has taken a new turn, or at least it's become more public. Senior abuse.
Yes.
Children are abusing their parents, moving into the home, and that's another aspect that we're seeing that oftentimes is more difficult to deal with than the male-female domestic violence. And the reason I asked you about the trafficking is that sometimes domestic violence leads you to trafficking cases that involve more than the individual who comes to court. And so there's a vigilance that you have to have when you get those cases. And I just wondered if you were dealing with that. But that senior abuse has become a big deal, and it becomes much more difficult to deal with. Sometimes adult protective services in your community under your family services, or what they used to call welfare, sometimes they can identify it. But that has been a major issue that's recurring now.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yes. So there are a couple of resources that help in courts address abuse in later life because it is more complicated, but it has similar traits to it, right? So just like with intimate partner violence, so we have these very nuanced, like family violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, to try to disaggregate and talk about them specifically. But when intimate partner violence between two partners, just like with abuse in later life, a lot of older parents or grandparents really don't want their kids to go to jail. They want the violence to stop. They want the abuse to stop, right? I mean, that's the hard, difficult part when once criminal justice got involved with these issues, is because it's not, in many cases, it's not meeting the needs of people who are trying to seek help, right? They want to keep their families intact. They just want, they need services to address some of the issues. And some, rightfully so, want them to go away and go to jail. So I think, but it's all very individual in terms of, and how do you respond to that as a court system, right? So yes, we do have that. We are seeing that. My organization has had a course for 10 to 12 years around how to enhance judicial responses to elder abuse cases, and the nuance between capacity and who's in capacity. Just because you're getting older doesn't mean that you lose the right to make decisions that you want, right? And when does the court and the state APS get involved? How do you balance that? So I know the National Center for State Courts also has a program for elder abuse, and it is a big issue. So I also, I guess my parting, this is just a little sampling of what we can discuss for 2.5 days in Ohio. But I do want to say one of the things that is important is that you are collaborating with your community, the stakeholders and your community. Sometimes it's best that the manager of the courthouse is in these conversations, even as equally as the judge, right? Sometimes the judge can't, based on this little canon thing that they have. But if you are working closely with your judge, the judge will say, we have these issues that we're seeing in our course. I need you to be out there in your community talking to these stakeholders, talking to communities, nonprofits so if you need resources to handle trafficking or elder victims, what resources are out there? If you need interpreters, how are you getting those interpreters? If you don't have the funds, or you have limited funds, if you have your limited court funds for interpreters, how are you getting interpreters that know the nuances around domestic and sexual assault or abuse in later life? Who would you go to? So I think in the last minute, I just wanted to say that these are very complex cases. You are all leaders in your own right. Some are going to do things that are way out there, way ahead, and your neighbor right next to you says, that's not my personality, but I can do this, right? So just take some time. This is why you're here at these events, to understand what your leadership, how your leadership personality style can help further those core competencies, and how you look at certain situations, certain cases that come into the courthouse, and what attention it needs, and how you need to be a little bit more crafty around it to meet those desired competencies. This one. So for the final, that's October 1st through the 3rd, is the national pilot training. There's a contact information for the person who's doing a lot of the registration and technical information on this. We do have scholarships. We know that sometimes it's hard for court managers to get the money to go out for 2.5 days for training. So we do have scholarships. So if you have any questions, you can ask them now, or you can contact NIDA.
Just to clarify, there's actually a typo, and October 1st through 3rd is one of our pilot trainings, but it is our statewide local training in New Mexico. So
Oh, yeah.
unless
Remember
you
that
live in New Mexico, but it's correct on the flyer. It's actually October 29th through 31st in Columbus, Ohio. So sorry about that.
Well, I was going to send you to New Mexico. You see it online. Anybody want a hard copy of the flyer?
So the flyer is attached in your app with the correct date?
Yes. No, they're not the one in New Mexico. The one in New Mexico is the first.
And I want to thank our speakers. And as Javoyne Hicks said, the flyer is attached, as is the domestic violence guide that she referenced earlier. And please rate this class on the app. It'll help for future conferences.